Hello, Robert.
Hello, Martin.
Welcome.
How are you today?
I'm doing very well, and you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, welcome to the BTS Creative Academy podcast. We're here today with you, Robert, as an author, but I understand you've had a very vibrant life in the arts, and I'm really interested to get to know you and get to know how you've come from this place of you've been involved in theatre and film, and you've had, it seems to me like you've had such a journey. I wonder how you've come to this place of being an author, how you've come to this place of being a writer.
Right.
So
Well, yep.
I was going to say, before we get into the full journey, I understand you've got a book out at the moment.
Yes, I have a novel out at the moment. It's called Bungalow Terrace, and it's the story of four best friends. They come from a working class neighborhood, and they're turned into a singing group. They're catapulted to fame, and they become this big, iconic rock and roll band in the mid to 20th century. But that's just the foundation of it. I mean, it's really more about their four individual lives as well as the life of this superstar rock group. So it deals with addiction. It deals with being gay at a time when being gay was illegal and considered a mental disease. It deals with secrets and the ramifications of secrets. It deals with the grieving process, and it deals with the concepts of forgiveness and reclaiming one's life. So it's a friendship saga. It's also a showbiz novel, and it's a backstage story.
And why this story? Why have you chosen to write this story now?
Well, I wanted to set it in an arena that I knew. And in the 1980s, I worked in New York City as a casting director. And then in the 1990s, I worked as what they call a talent executive. So it was an arena that I knew. So I wanted to set it in show business. And I had to think, because it starts when they're children. It starts in the mid 1950s, and the book ends in the late 90s, right before the beginning of the millennium. So it spans 50 years. And I did want to start it when they were children. And I thought, okay, what really in show business will a group of people stay together for a long period of time that makes sense? And so that's why I made them a singing group. Because particularly in the 60s and 70s, most singing groups at that time in America, as well as I think in England, they were friends, either childhood friends or teenage friends who formed a band. But the real reason I wrote the book was I really wanted to say something about the human condition and what traps people into a limited experience. Besides being a writer, I spent a good deal of time being a photographer. And as both, I've always been intrigued by the shadow that exists not only in the human experience, but also in society. So it was this conflict that I wanted to express in Bungalow Terrace, but I always thought that that was just half of the story. So I also wanted to put into words something concrete about what happens to an individual's experience when they're exposed to the miracle of a shifted perception. There was a German physicist, and he coined the phrase, if you change the way that you look at things, then the things you look at will change. And so it's this sort of seemingly simple, yet in practice, this daunting act of transformation that I really wanted to talk about in Bungalow Terrace.
And this story, is there an element of truth there then, an element of your real life that you've put into fiction?
Well, I was inspired by many things. In the beginning chapters of the book, it takes place in a Catholic school. And that was certainly inspired by my 12 years of going to a Catholic school. One of the main characters is gay, a little earlier than the time that I sort of realized that I was gay. But it was certainly, his coming out story was certainly inspired by my experience and my own coming out story. And there's other things. I mean, there's an argument that takes place in the book that's somewhat significant, and it was sort of inspired by, an argument that I witnessed between a director and an actor in the summer stock situation. So I did draw inspiration from my own life, but it really is fiction. I was never in a rock and roll band. Even when I worked in show business, I worked primarily in television. I never worked in the recording industry or the music industry. Though I did peripherally work in that when I was a talent executive because I had to book a lot of bands. But what I realized most when I was writing the story was, because a lot of people were saying, oh, who is the band based on? Who are these people? Is it like a Romano Clef? Or, and I kept saying, no, it's not Valley of the Dolls. But I realized going on that all of the characters are actually just different aspects of myself. When I really looked at it, the character of Vince is the compulsive part of myself, and the character of Colin is the part of myself that really needs to control everything. And the character of Anita is the part of me that's somewhat manipulative. And I really had to just sort of get in touch with those aspects of myself to make these characters somewhat authentic.
You also touched previously on the shadow. Is that something that is a part of yourself? Explain to me how that works within the story.
Well, in the beginning, and particularly in show business, there is a darker side to that arena. And not everybody necessarily acts in the most appropriate ways. There is certainly some inappropriate behavior going on in the book. And usually that stems from that more shadow aspect of the human condition, that darker part of ourselves, which I was very clear about making reasons for that. I mean, there are no heroes and there are no villains in the story. I mean, I wanted to make everybody human. Everybody is human. I really wanted to write not only the what and the how, but also the why. And I was really, really careful to make the why really palpable because I just wanted it to be a human story. But we all have that darker nature to ourselves. And some people act out of it because they necessarily don't want to look at it or explore it or get to the root cause of it. Or, you know, they want to see themselves in a more, I guess, positive light. And then there are other people who sort of acknowledge that, you know, I have the capacity for that. But let me sort of explore this. Let me heal that. Because only when you heal that aspect of yourself will you then become whole. And that was something I wanted to explore. And I think that that's something that most people are at least aware of in their own behavior. I think some people are more willing to confront it than other people are.
I wonder, did it help you at all? Did it help you explore another side of yourself in the writing process? Did it make you stop and think for a moment?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I said, for me, if I was writing a particular passage or a particular scene, unless I could personally identify emotionally what the character was going through, then it didn't seem authentic to me, particularly in the dialogue. So I guess it was in some sense a form of personal therapy, because when I was writing it, I needed to feel what the character was actually feeling. I had to understand that aspect of the human condition or that human experience. And some of it was very difficult. I mean, there were two specific instances I can think of where I didn't know if I could go to that place. I didn't know if I could write it in a credible way and in a responsible way. But then it was just me.
Very vulnerable exercise writing. Even when you're writing fiction, you are laying your soul out in front of people. You are sharing some of perhaps your darkest moments or thoughts. You know, some people might question, how could you have this kind of imagination? So there, how do we get over that fear of sharing vulnerably like this?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, and it's a process. I just think, you know, you just have to get in touch with the fact that you're human, you know, and there may be behaviors that you have indulged in. I mean, I'm of a certain age, so you know, I've certainly dealt with certain things in terms of my own behavior that I have certainly healed, and I don't engage in the world in that way anymore. I mean, certainly the way I engaged with the world when I was 20 is not the way that I engage with the world now. But it's a process, and I sort of equated to an actor who decides to do a scene and they decide they're going to do sort of a sense memory exercise, or they're going to do what we used to call in the 50s the method, you know, more Stanislavski approach to the scene. And I sort of looked at it like that. I mean, I didn't actually have to necessarily do the action that's taking place in the book, but I had to get to a place where I felt what the character felt. For example, there was one scene where this woman was coming from this complete place of lack. I mean, she was really living this poverty consciousness. And, you know, I had to get in touch with when in my own life I felt those kinds of feelings, because I've certainly had that experience in my life where I wasn't necessarily sure where the rent was coming from. I wasn't really sure how the stack of bills in my drawer were going to get paid. You know, there were certainly moments of tremendous fear and anxiety about all of that, but she was going to an even deeper place. So I said, you know, I need to just sort of get in touch with how that used to feel for me, and what that kind of fear, that kind of dread feels like. And you can superimpose other experiences on that. What's important is that the emotion is authentic, not necessarily, you know, what it is that you're writing about or what you're playing on the stage. I mean, you don't necessarily have to have that experience, but you can actually create the authentic emotion that is associated with it, simply because you've experienced that emotion before. It just may be in another context. And that's kind of how I did it.
Someone recently said, and I know that you've got a bit of experience in theatre, someone recently said to me, theatre is the empathy machine. I think that's similar with writing as well. I think with writing, you need to have empathy. You don't necessarily have to have lived the experience for which you're writing about, hence it being fiction. But you do need to find a place of understanding and adapt your own experiences and take from them and adapt that and understand, well, how would that feel for you in that experience?
Right, exactly. I mean, it's the old adage, you know, if for the grace of God, you know, there go I. So, I mean, I think that that's one of the most important themes of the book is empathy and forgiveness. You know, I mean, forgiveness is a huge theme that runs throughout the book. And I couldn't write this story because it takes place over 50 years, as I had mentioned, and there are a lot of characters in it, main characters, secondary characters. And if I'm writing these characters, I had to find the humanity in them, the empathy that I could feel for them in order for me to write them realistically and to create whole people. So yeah, so empathy is extremely important. Plus, I mean, you know, that's, if I didn't feel it, then how could I expect the reader to feel it? I mean, if you actually don't, I mean, if you go to the theater and you watch a brilliant performance and you're feeling what, you know, the actor is feeling, then they're doing their job, you know, but you can sort of tell when something is being, you know, sort of phoned in, or something is not necessarily ringing true. And I really worked really hard in Bungalow Terrace to make sure that whatever the characters were going through, it was something the audience could relate to, they could empathize with, and they could feel along with them what was going on with them, that they could see themselves in it. You know,
as
it's really important.
We seem to have a radar, don't we, for authenticity, for truth, for and we feel that in empathy, and we feel that in, like you say, when we read a book of fiction, we know when it's coming from a place of truth. We know when it's being authentic. We know when the writer meant it, or when the actor performed it and meant it, rather than, like you say, phoned it in, or or they faked it.
Right. Or, you know, with writing, a lot of times it's like, well, the character will do this because I need, in terms of the plot line, the story to go from one place to another. So sometimes, you know, it's very tempting to create a character as a device. And I worked really hard not to do that, because I didn't want to just use devices to get the story from one place to the other. I wanted it to make sense. And I wanted it to be based on a foundation of, as we said, of truth and authenticity. And that can be a difficult thing to do, because, oh, it would be just so easy to do this, and then they could get over here and boom, 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 we're done. But if it didn't ring true to me, then I was like, because to me, the most important thing in writing in any form of the arts is to get your ego out of the way and to focus in on what is in the best interest of the piece and how to make that piece resonate with an audience, which is different than getting an audience's approval. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, will this resonate with a large group of people? So you always have to focus on what the emotional through line of the piece is, and whether or not it's in the best interest of the piece, and whether or not it's going to resonate. And that is subjective, because what resonates with one person doesn't necessarily resonate with somebody else. But I think any story that's told in a truthful way will resonate with anyone on some level. You know, it may
That's
not be a
interesting.
straight. Yeah.
That's interesting that you bring the ego into that, because it takes a lot of personal work
Yeah.
to get that ego under control. It takes a number of years to understand what's happening with the ego. And I don't think the ego, some people would say the ego is all bad. I don't believe that. I think the ego is there partly to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a way in which we can learn to manage that ego. And I think it's a process that lasts all of our lives. I don't know that it ever ends.
Right. Exactly.
And so,
Exactly.
yeah, it's interesting that as a writer, you need to understand yourself in order to create fictional characters.
Right. Oh yeah, I think it's really. I mean, if you want to write that kind of a story, I think investing in exploring the human condition, I mean, is
Mm,
essential. Um, and in terms of the ego, I mean, as with anything else, you can act from a place of fear, which is generated by the ego, or you can act from a more evolved place. I mean, you can make that choice. But I found in my own life, and I could just speak from experience, whenever I choose to act from a place of fear, it doesn't necessarily work out for me. And it's
no,
not when I'm at my best, and it's not when I'm creating at my best, because fear to me destroys the creative process, and it certainly doesn't create anything collaborative. Like when
no,
I was working with a copy editor on the book, um, I had to really get the ego out of the way, because there were certain things that she obviously wanted to change, as any editor wants to change. And, initially, because I spent so much time writing the book and rewriting it and re-editing it, and it gone through many, many drafts. You feel like it's, almost like, it's your baby. It's almost like, a part of you.
of course.
And when somebody wants to alter it, you get a little defensive. And I had to really just at one point, not long into the process, so I'm very proud of myself for this, take a deep breath and be like, is what this woman is suggesting in the best interest of the piece? And if the answer is yes, let it go. And if it's not, then have a discussion about it, collaborate, give the reasons why you don't think that change should be made. But at the same time, the first question I had to ask myself is this in the best interest of the story? Will this make Bungalow Terrace a stronger book? And if the answer was yes, then I'm like, well, Bob, get your ego out of the way. Just because you like the passage doesn't mean that that it serves the story. And it's a difficult place to get to, because you're very protective of your work, and you're very protective of your vision, and you're very protective of your perspective of what you wanted the piece to be. But sometimes somebody else's perspective does make the piece stronger. That's why collaboration, particularly in the arts, is so wonderful. And I think everybody should welcome it. For a writer, it's a little more difficult, because writing is such a solitary act. It's sort of just you, yourself, and I for a long period of time. So then when you bring the collaborative process into it, it can be a little jarring at first. But I found, whether I was casting or whether I'm a photographer, whatever the case may be, collaboration is the best way to get the best, I don't like to use the word product, but the best finished form of what it is that you want to create.
So there's a conversation that is happening here in the UK at the moment. There's in the UK we have a newspaper called The Stage, and
Okay.
within the Stage paper there was an article recently about how we should be looking to support older writers. There's a lot of funding and support given to young writers, but
Right.
older writers are kind of brushed aside. You've kind of had your time, and this happens a lot in the arts across many different fields. Once you
Yeah.
get to a certain point in your life, it's up to you to figure out how you make it work and fit in. However,
Right.
with everything that we've spoke about so far, these things that are important to writing, like managing the ego, understanding how to make the right decision for the craft, that takes
Right.
time to understand. It doesn't, and that time isn't just a couple of years, it's
Right.
sometimes decades.
Right. Well, I think, I mean, unfortunately, we live in a somewhat ageist society, that after a certain point, you seem somewhat obsolete, or, particularly somebody who's had tremendous success when they were young, and they were sort of the it person at the moment. And then as they get older, people sort of decide, well, they've had their moment. They probably said all that they could say. We're going to just sort of discard them. And the unfortunate thing is that what I would have created as a writer in my 20s is not what I created now. And that's the evolution of the human experience. You know, even somebody who's considered, like back in the day, we used to call them wonderkins, or wonderkinds. You know, they sort of make a splash onto the scene, and they're young, and they're, you know, they're vibrant, and they're, you know, something new. You know, they're like exciting. It's like a shiny new object. And that's great. And what they're creating is wonderful. But at the same time, wait, watch them through their career, because what they create at 40 will probably be better than what they created at 20, even though what they created at 20 was sensational or extraordinary. And wait, when they get to be 60, when you get some of that wisdom, you know, when you get some of your own crap out of the way, you know, what they're creating at that point could be extraordinary. So I think that, you know, we would be better served if we cultivated and nurtured long-term careers for writers or creative people, as opposed to jumping on the bandwagon when somebody's sort of new and shiny and then discarding them later on in life. I mean, some of my favorite authors, some of the best books I've ever written have been written by people who are of a significant age right now. And I would welcome reading another novel by them, or go to another play. I mean, please, I'd love to see, you know, I mean, unfortunately, last year he passed away, but I mean, I would adore to see the new Stephen Sondheim musical. You know, I mean, I think that we as a society have lost the, I think we've lost the capacity to really sort of nurture and cultivate a career that's, you know, over a period of time, because we're always moving on to the next thing. What is the new next thing? Well, somebody in their 60s could create the new next thing. Just give them a chance. You know, just open yourself up to the possibility of that.
So for you, how many books have you wrote now? Is this your?
This is my first book.
This is your first book. And can I ask, at what age did you come to completion of that first book?
I finished the book when I was 60. I finished the book when I was 60.
Well, you're looking beautiful. I wouldn't have guessed.
Well, thank you very much. I finished it when I was 60. I've always been somebody who, and I think this is from my upbringing, I would go into something, but once it no longer served me, and that doesn't mean that I wasn't still doing something successful with it, but once it didn't serve me any longer, or something else took precedence, then I've always been somebody who was able to put that down, not necessarily let it go, because maybe I will go back to it, and then move on to something else. And that's sort of the trajectory of my life. I mean, I went to college and I studied theater, and I got a degree in theater. And when I first moved to New York City, my intention was to be a performer. But I've always been somebody who thought, well, you know, you should do something you're really great at, as opposed to something that you're just good at. And I was good. I mean, I was a good, I guess, character actor. But I mean, I really, once I got to the city and I saw what was around me, the immense talent pool that was around me, I said, you know, you're good at this, but you're not great at it. What are you great at? And I said, what I'm really great at is being able to, you know, succinctly articulate to somebody else how to create something from within themselves to satisfy a client. I said, you're really great at that. And that's when I decided, well, what career would that be the focus? And I was like, well, that's kind of what a casting director does all day long. You know, you audition actors and you articulate to an actor and you get what it is the client is looking for from the actor. It's very collaborative. And you're really great at being able to do that in a really succinctly kind way. And that's when I moved into casting. And then, you know, in the mid-90s, you know, I sort of got disillusioned with show business. I got disillusioned with television. And I took a trip to Ireland, and I spent hours and hours and hours photographing the countryside, just for myself, not for a project or anything. And I literally lost myself. And I said, well, maybe this is what you should be doing. But I don't have a degree in photography. I've never really studied photography. But I said, you know something? Let's see what happens. So I started to study photography. I went back to graduate school. That's what brought me to the state of Maine, to go to graduate school for photography. And I became a photographer. I didn't finish graduate school, but I did is I got together with a number of other photographers, and we created this sort of collective, this professional collective. So that's a whole other story. But and for about 15 years, I worked as a photographer. And that was very satisfying, and it was wonderful, and it was I could explore many different themes, many different things with the still image. And then this is the true story. One day, I'd had a particularly really difficult day, and I'd come home, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I think I was having a glass of anisette, and the first lines of the book popped into my head. The first lines of the book are, they grew up on the same street, a street called Bungalow Terrace. And I was like, what is that? And I sort of just kind of dismissed it. I mean, I thought about it for like, 5 or 10 minutes, but I let it go. But as I tell most people with all great inspirations, it wouldn't necessarily let me go. And before I knew it, as I was walking through the grocery store or driving down the lane, this story started formulating in my head. But I have the same judgment that I did before about photography. I never went to school for creative writing. I don't think I've ever taken a creative writing course. But once again, I said, well, something's calling to you. So one night at the same table, I sat down and I wrote a facsimile of what the first chapter is. And out of everything I've ever done, it was the most stimulating, the most creative, the most rewarding experience I ever had. And that includes everything I did in theater and everything I did as a photographer. And so I said, okay, if we're going to do it, then you need to do what you did. Because when I was learning to be a photographer, I mean, I literally would lock myself in a dark room for 9-10 hours at a time to become a master at how to print a photograph. And I just happen to be an extremist in that way. I'm not advocating that to anyone, that that's the way you should be. But in terms of learning a craft, that's kind of what I do. I just jump in and I commit 100%, and I just immerse myself in it until I feel I have some sort of I have a measure of what's the word I'm looking for, that I can do. I guess that I can just actually do it, and do it with some sort of clarity and some sort of professionalism.
Do you think,
and so yeah.
Sorry, I was going to ask, do you think that when we have a creative vision, when we are drawn to something, that we must study it in an educational way? Do you think that we must go down that route of learning more? Or as the creative vision comes to us, we should just follow the path that unfolds in front of us?
I think that you should follow whatever path is right for you. For example, when I decided to go back, I mean, my feelings about my education in terms of photography and writing were just judgments. And that's really all they were. They were just my personal judgments based on, I guess, what the outside world dictates is, how you get from point A to point B. If you want to do something and you want to be serious about it, and you want to be successful at it, and you want to be taken seriously, then you need some sort of education in it. So I had that, and I'm not saying that that isn't necessarily true, but I'm saying that for me, it wasn't about what the truth was. It was just about, that was a judgment I had. And when I went to graduate school for photography, I realized that, no, this is not the right path for me. And I only stayed 1 semester. And I realized in order to become a photographer, what I needed to do is I needed to be in the group of photographers. I needed to be in a collective group of photographers and learn as I did from masters and people who know what they're doing, as opposed to sitting in front of a computer writing papers on theory, which is what a lot of my graduate studies were. So when I decided to become a writer, I said, you've been down this road before, get that judgment out of your head. But be disciplined about it. If this is something that you're going to do, then do it, but don't do it like occasionally, on the weekends. Don't do it as a hobby. Do it as a career. So I got up every morning, and for 4 hours every single day, I made myself sit first in front of pen and paper, the second draft in front of a computer, and sit there and write. And there were some days when nothing came, and there were other days when, I would just be writing, 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 writing. But I would make myself sit there for 4 hours and just focus on the task of writing. And I mean, I was always a good writer. I mean, in terms of, my own background, I mean, I was always somebody that felt I had, um, I had some affinity to writing. Um, and then when I realized what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to create a human story based on the truth and what really is happening in the human experience. I said, well, you can write about this. The important thing is not necessarily the technical writing, the dexterity with which you write the story. What's important is that you get in touch with that part of yourself that can tell a truthful story.
Tell me a little bit more about the creative process that you go through, that you went through in order to get this book finished. Because I know for myself, I have done some writing in theatre. I wrote some theatre scripts, and I have found with them it possible for me to do that. Even as someone with learning difficulties as dyslexia, I was able to do that because I had a deadline where it must be met, where I was going to put on a show, and I'd committed to putting on a show at a certain time and a certain date. So it led me to somewhere that needed completion. But when you're an author of a book, it doesn't necessarily have that. And I've tried a lot I've had stories come to me, and I find I get lost in the process because it doesn't have that deadline. How have you got around that? How have you got around the fact that you could do this indefinitely?
Right. Well, the first thing I tend to be somebody who's organized. So, I mean, in writing this particular story, there was a degree of research I had to do. And not just research into the record industry in the 60s and 70s or the music industry. I mean, I'm talking about, for example, a lot of it takes place in various locations. And I want those locations to be authentic to somebody who actually lived or knew those locations at that period of time. Like if somebody was on Grove Street in 1964, I wanted because I wanted it not only to be a story of people, but I also wanted it to be a very specific place. I wanted it to be place-centric as well. So if somebody, who read it, I was like, that's exactly how it was on Grove Street in 1965. So I really, so I did need to do a lot of research. But then I sort of realized that there's so much material written about this particular subject. So I really had to just focus in on, what is it that the story requires in terms of research, and focus in on that. And then once I felt I had the research done, then I just started writing. But I forced myself not to be too indulgent. I mean, I would write something, and if I found I was being really indulgent in terms of getting something right, getting something perfect, I would force myself to move on. That didn't mean I didn't come back to it. But I felt at that point I had no objectivity about it. And I was sort of blocking myself. And I said, move on to something else, move on to the next part of the story. And then I also started trusting my characters, because I think having an outline is really wonderful. And I did have an outline for the book. But I realized as I was writing the book that the characters, if you trust them, they will tell you where they want to go. And you have to listen to them. And you have to listen to whatever that instinct is within you that is listening to them, to trust that this is the right direction for the book. There was one character, there was a point where they're in Malibu. And, for some reason, there was a minor character who ended up becoming a secondary character, simply because as I was writing this quote unquote scene, I realized, oh, these people want to get married, which had nothing to do with my outline and had nothing to do with the arc of this particular character's story. But I was willing to be more flexible, more malleable in terms of shifting my outline or shifting the story based on where I felt the characters wanted to go. So I think a lot of it has to do with listening to your instinct and trusting your instinct. and just sort of feeling what's right in the moment and trying not to be judgmental about it. There were certainly times when I had to get up and walk away from it. And there were certainly times when there were more difficult things to write that I struggled and I struggled and I struggled. But for me, that's never been the hardest part of it. To me, I'm willing to sort of sit there and get it right, or come back to it and get it right, than to just, let it go altogether. I'm pretty pragmatic. I'm pretty dogmatic when it comes to completing a project. But you have to be able to commit to a project without being rigid in terms of how you're going to proceed. I mean, I think if you're just flexible and you're malleable, and you open yourself up to the process, and you don't judge yourself and you don't judge your work, where it's supposed to go and what it's supposed to be will be revealed to you. It's sort of that ideology that it's already been created. It already exists. The blank. I mean, that's kind of, I think it was Michelangelo. That's how he created the sculpture. Already existed. He just had to carve into the stone and reveal it. And that's kind of how I always approached writing the book. The book's already finished. It's not already finished, it's already published. It is in its complete form. All you have to do is just reveal it onto the page. And the way that you reveal it onto the page is to try to get in touch with that more expansive part of yourself, which is always connected to that creative source. You can never be disconnected from your creative source. It is always there. We're just, as human beings, always blocking it because we allow all of this other stuff to get in the way, to pile on top of it. Whether it's what's going on in your personal life, or it's your judgments, or it's allowing yourself to react to a situation instead of respond to a situation. I mean, there are a variety of different ways we can get in our own way, but you always have to trust that I'm always connected to that creative source. That inspiration is always there. We are never disconnected. And I just need to quiet myself and get to a place where I can let everything else go and trust where that is and just reveal what's supposed to be on the page. And I mean, that's how I basically worked.
So with this creative source, where do you feel this comes from? Where do you feel the creative image, the creative vision, the creative storytelling? Where is this creative source, and how do you tap into it?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you choose to believe in. I mean, and you can call it whatever you choose to call it. I mean, some people say the universe, some people refer to it as their higher selves. Some people who are more religious will say God. I don't think it really matters what you call it. I mean, I'm somebody who believes that we're bigger than our stories, that we're not our circumstances, and that if you define yourself by your circumstance, you never allow yourself to change your mind about yourself. I'm somebody who believes that we're really just individuations of something bigger and more powerful and more expansive than that. I honestly believe that the power that created the heavens and the earth is the same power that courses through us. We just have to be able to access it. So I don't really get into any sort of judgment about what you call it or what that is. But, I think even physics has admitted, I mean, which is science, I mean, that there's some sort of more intelligent energy going on here. I really do believe that it's just energy. But I believe that we're connected to whatever that larger energy is. As I said, I think we're the individuations of something much bigger and bolder and grander than ourselves, however you choose to define it. And you just have to learn how to tap into that.
I wonder if being more open to that, open to it being the universe or God or whatever we want to call it, and understanding that there is another dimension, that another plane of existence maybe that has some overriding energy that's coming into this existence. Just being open to those ideas can help us move forward.
Oh, yes, exactly. And, and the ideology that if something is coming from a positive place, I mean, some people call it love, other people have different definitions of it. But if you're creating from that particular place, then there's something really authentic about it. I mean,
Mhm.
if that's the voice that's speaking to you, if that's the voice that you're hearing, the voice that is always collaborative, the voice that is always positive, the voice that is always complimentary, the voice that is sort of always on your side, the voice that is your cheerleader, as it were, then that's the authentic voice. That's the authentic part of you. And that's what you need. You don't need to do anything, but that's what I tried to create from. If you're hearing that other voice, I mean, that other voice, which is a fear-based voice, which is the voice that is dictating that, everything that you're doing is wrong and you can't do it, or you're not capable enough, or you're not educated enough, or, you're not talented enough. I mean, that is not an authentic voice at all. That is basically coming from what I call an egoic place. And that is not the voice you need to be listening to. And if that's the voice you're listening to while you're creating something, it's not going to be an authentic piece. It may be an interesting piece. It may be a piece that some people find resonates with them, but I don't think it's going to be the piece that really speaks to the greatness that who you are, because it doesn't matter who you are and what you do for a living. We all are capable of creating something from that extraordinary place. We just have different roles to play. It may be a mother in the kitchen creating this magnificent dessert for her family. I mean, that is as valid and as creative and as fantastic as somebody, writing the next great American novel. It's all
And
valid and it's all, yeah.
you mentioned how when you came from a place of fear, how everything went wrong for you. And I've also experienced that myself, that when my thoughts came from a place of fear, when that feeling came from a place of negativity, things, whether we're talking about things creatively or to do with my family or friendships or anything in my life, when it came from a negative or fearful place, it always went wrong. But
Right.
whenever I took things from a more positive angle and a place of love, everything has worked out for me.
Yes, yes. And I think that that in general is how it works. I really, really do. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, a lot of people think, well, if I appear as pathetic as possible, then some sort of entity outside of myself will feel sorry for me and give me what I want. And I've come to the realization for myself, this is just my own personal belief, that the universe doesn't reward us for our suffering. The universe just reflects back to us what it is we're already feeling. So if I'm feeling bad about myself, the universe is just going to recreate other experiences where I feel bad about myself. So it's really all about how you feel and how what your perception of the world is, which is then going to determine what your future is. I'm a firm believer in that. But as I say, I mean, that's just something, I mean, I believe in it and I don't dictate that anybody else should believe that. But I've just found that is really the truth for me. That is
And
based
I
on my perception.
and I think if you're looking for the truth, I think it has to be a personal decision to move into that truth for you. I don't think it works when you preach or you tell others this is what will
Right.
work for you, because I don't think you can, like I say, I've found this is a very similar experience to myself in the last couple of years, that having a belief in the universe and understanding how our personal energy works and vibrations work has moved my life in a positive direction. But if you'd have said that to me 5 or 10 years ago, I'd have said you're talking absolute nonsense and not even begin to entertain the idea of shifting my energy and my thought process.
Right, right. Well, something, I think it comes down to people who, because when you start talking in these concepts,
Mm.
um, some people shy away from it because they think it's a little too metaphysical. So I always just simply say, if somebody asks me, because like I say, I don't really impose any of this on anybody. I don't really talk about it, except to a few people because we, get together, we want to talk about it. But I usually just tell people it's as simple as, the energy that you put out is the energy that will come back to you. And there's nothing metaphysical about it. That's literally science. That's physics. So if that's easier for you to grasp onto because it's more pragmatic, it seems more in touch with, the outside world, if that's a more realistic explanation for you, And that's great. That's fine. But I mean, usually that's what I'll just say. It's really just a matter of physics. You know, what you put out energetically, because everything is energy. You know, I mean, this table right here is energy. I mean, we're all energy. You know, and the energy you put out. So sometimes, and for me, what it did when I came to that understanding was it then made me take complete responsibility for my life, my choices, and my actions. Because I'm like, okay, well, if this is what I'm putting out, and what I'm putting out here is now going to come back to me, is this really what you want to come back to me? What it is you're putting out here right now? And if it's not, then you need to stop it. And that really was something that just opened my eyes in terms of taking responsibility for my own life. Basically, well, if this is what's going on, what have you been doing recently in terms of what you're putting into the world energetically that created this scenario for you? And it usually doesn't take me more than 5 minutes to be like, okay, well, I was doing this. This is what I was thinking then. This is what was happening. And I can usually go back, you know, a month, a couple of months to be like, okay, well, you know, you're the one who created it because, you know, 2 months ago, this is what you were putting out into the world. So it just was, it's just coming back to you. So you have to take responsibility for it.
And this, and I'm finding this at this moment, having this conversation is really interesting to me, because I kind of came to a realization that the things that have been happening to me recently and over the last few years, I am in a place that, whilst I always saw myself as a responsible person, and I've got children, I've got my own family, and I've got some good friends. So I always saw myself as being responsible and making well-defined decisions, but I never really considered the responsibility of all of my actions, everything that I'm doing. And today, before this conversation, I had a realization of that. I had a moment of, wow, I really have taken a hold of this thing. I really have understood the responsibility, and it took me a long time to get there, but I think it's a more peaceful place taking the responsibility. It might sound fearful, it might sound daunting to take responsibility, but the truth of it is the exact opposite.
Well, right, exactly, because it forces you to look at your behavior and look at how you perceive the world. And changing your perception of the world is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. It means that you're going to have to sort of change. And if you've always responded to a particular, you know, situation in a particular way, you know, but it's certainly not bringing, you know, it's not coming back to you in the way that you were hoping, then, like I said, it seems relatively easy or simple to just shift your perception and, you know, take another course or use a different tactic. But that's easier said than done. That's why I said initially, you know, this seemingly simple, yet in practice, this daunting act of transformation is not the easiest thing to shift, you know, behavior that you've been engaging in for a certain amount of time. But once you do get the ideology in your head that, you know, what you put out is what comes back to you, then ultimately, who else is responsible for what's going on in your life? Who else is responsible for creating what's happening in your life if that's how it works? And, you know, and as I say, you know, it's a question of physics, it's science. I mean, that's basically how it works. You know, and that doesn't mean that I don't, you know, I mean, I certainly am not like walking around, you know, like you know, a model of love and peace. And, you know, I mean, I have my moments, you know, and
Yes,
I mean, I can
cool.
agree with people. I get, you know, but this is the difference. And I said this the other day. If I'm saying I'm in the grocery store and I'm in a long line and I'm getting impatient because all I'm thinking about is what I need to do in the next 10 minutes, half hour, etc. What I then say to myself, which is something I didn't say 20 years ago, is like, Bob, all of this impatience doesn't serve you, because the only thing this impatience is going to do is it's just going to recreate more experiences in your life where you're going to feel impatient. So why don't you just take a breath and be okay with the fact that you're standing in line and pick up a magazine and, you know, read about somebody or something. And that's really, really helpful when I find myself behaving in a specific way. Or, you know, if I behave in a specific way that isn't from my highest self or isn't in my highest good, I'm much, much more open to going back and amending that, reconciling it, you know, apologizing for something, because, you know, I want to take responsibility for who I am and what it is that I put into the world. And that can be, you know, creatively, and that can also be personally. Um, but, you know, if you find yourself, you know, just, and it could be, like I say, it could be impatient, you could be frustrated, you know, it could be anything, it could be jealousy, it could be anything. You know, just sort of realize that, like, okay, this is what I'm putting into the world right now. I'm putting this energy into the world. And if this is what I'm putting in, it's just going to come back. So you're just recreating another experience that's going to make you feel whatever that is. And once you come to that realization, for me anyway, it helped me to stop. It helped me to start trying to find a different way to respond to a situation. I was like, Bob, stop reacting, respond. Take a moment and respond in a way that will not only benefit you, but will benefit the situation and will benefit everybody else involved. If all you're thinking about, and this is a lot of times creatively, I think, where people get messed up, they're thinking about how this is going to serve me, how this project is going to serve me, how this story is going to serve me, how this contract is going to serve me. But if you go into a situation thinking creatively, whatever the project may be, how is this going to serve everyone? How does this serve everyone involved? You're going to have a significantly different experience than how is this going to serve me? Because if it serves everyone, it's going to serve you as well. Because you can't leave yourself out of that equation. So it's just made me be able to think from a more expansive way in terms of how I go into a situation.
And I have a lot of similarity with that, and I wonder if it's something to do with your past in theatre and entertainment. Whether I feel sometimes that whole industry is a little selfish. I sometimes feel there is a, you know, that as from an actor, you've been a performer yourself. You go out there, you put yourself out into the world, and you compete for parts. You compete for a role. And it is all about you. And for 20 years, I wanted and tried to be an actor. That was the thing that I thought I was meant to be doing, or no, it was more of a case of I thought that was what I was good at, so therefore I must do that.
Right.
But I think coming away from that life and coming away from that mindset of what am I doing for me, and changing that to a focus of what is for others and what is for perhaps the greater good, my life has become more fulfilling.
Right, exactly. And the thing is that, you know, the one thing that I used to always tell people when I was casting, you know, because an actor would go into an audition, and I had a lot of friends at that time who were actors in New York. And they would go into an audition situation, and then they would spend the next 2 days dissecting what happened in the audition. Will it get me a call back? Won't it get me a call back? And then if they didn't get a call back, wondering everything that they did and they didn't do wrong as to why they didn't get the call back. And I always tell people all the time, well, first of all, if it's your experience to have, nobody can take that away from you. It doesn't matter if you go in there and you sing flat. If it's your experience to have, then it will be your experience. I used to tell people that all the time because I firmly believe that. Nobody can take your experience away from you. And if you're consistently not getting an experience because maybe there's something else, maybe there's something bigger, better, more important in terms of your own life, in terms of your own human experience that you're supposed to be doing. But also, I would tell people all the time, what most actors don't understand is usually when somebody ends up getting a role, what it comes down to is so absolutely mundane and has literally nothing to do with what you did in the audition. You know, there was this one project I was working on, and the director wanted this one actress. I thought she was the best person for the part. The other producers wanted her. And the gentleman who was sort of in charge of everything, you know, we couldn't make a final decision without him, kept saying no, 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 no. And then finally it was revealed that he didn't want this particular actress because she reminded him of his ex-girlfriend. That's the reason she didn't get the part. Not because everybody wanted her. She was the best person for the part. She was a great actress. But And I would tell people all the time, it comes down to things like that. He fits the costume. You know, I mean, so you can't really just, I mean, so all of this energy that people were spending on sort of trying to dissect what it is they did right or what they did wrong, just was like a waste of energy, because it may have come down to something as simple as he reminded the producer of his ex-girlfriend. That's why you didn't get the part. It has nothing to do with you. It really has nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with him. But still, you know, but unfortunately, and that was one of the reasons why I left show business, was it really is an industry that is based on a foundation of lack. It's now I'm speaking from my experience in the 80s and 90s. I don't know what it is like now. I mean, I haven't worked in the show business industry in like 30 years. So I'm speaking from past experience. But it was always about, you know, there's not enough of something. There's not enough parts, there's not enough projects, there's not enough money, there's not enough financing. It was always built on a foundation of there's not enough. And so instead of coming from an abundant place where abundance is all about what can I give in this particular situation, it was always coming from most people were coming from a place of being afraid they were going to lose something or something was going to be taken away from them. And when you're coming from that place, as we talked before, it's not going to really create anything lasting or something substantial or worthwhile. And unfortunately, you know, it doesn't generate, you know, the best behavior in people as well. Because a lot of people in doing these interviews have been wanting to talk about the darker side to show business. And I just say, well, you know, if you're coming from a place of fear, fear will generate, you know, inconsiderate behavior. You know, it'll generate bad behavior. It will generate inappropriate behavior, because you're coming from a place of trying to make sure that something bad doesn't happen. And so you tend to be somewhat defensive, or you tend to be closed, or you tend to be guarded. And the only way to really be is to be open. I mean, vulnerability is the most powerful place that you can be. When you are vulnerable, you are at your most powerful, powerful place, because you are open to what I was talking about, that creative source, that powerful source that created everything, if you want to put it that way, or just you're just completely open to your higher self, the best part of yourself. But a lot of people are afraid to become vulnerable because they think on some level it equates itself with weakness, or they're going to give too much of themselves away, or they're going to be harmed in some way. You know, so they'll put up a shield. But I'm a firm believer that, like, you know, if you put the shield down and just open yourself up, you'll be absolutely the most powerful you can absolutely be. And I found that in my own personal life. Whenever I've been completely vulnerable, completely exposed, it's been the most powerful time in my life, because there are no defenses. There's nothing standing in my way to get me to point A to point B. You know, plus you're being real, you know, allowing people to see who you really are.
So what advice would you say you would give to yourself if you could go back in time to before you had some of these realizations, to before you realized that there was a better place being vulnerable? What would you say to yourself at that stage in your life to help you move forward?
I would say become friends with forgiveness. Forgiveness is the most powerful tool that we have. And I'm a firm believer that until you choose forgiveness, whatever it is that you're struggling with, whatever drama, trauma, whatever it is that you're struggling with, will literally define every choice and decision that you ever make. Whether it's, you know, what you're going to pick up in the grocery store, to, you know, how you're going to engage in your marriage. You know, but once you choose forgiveness, whether you choose to forgive yourself or somebody else, whatever the situation is, you are literally free. Whatever that trauma is, it's literally lifted from you, and you're free. It no longer informs you. It no longer haunts you. It no longer is sort of this baggage that you're carrying. I equate it. I do. There was somebody who I listened to who always equates it to your luggage. You know, sort of, here I am with my luggage. But once you choose forgiveness, you can put the luggage down. And that's what I would tell my younger self. Just become friends with forgiveness. you know, in terms of forgiving yourself and forgiving other people. And that's very difficult. I mean, forgiveness is probably the most difficult thing that we all have, especially if somebody else has wronged us or we've done something that we aren't necessarily proud of. It's a very, very difficult tool to use, but it literally will set you free.
It took me near on 10 years to forgive someone. It took me near on 10 years to put down that baggage. I knew I was carrying it. I knew it was a struggle. I knew it was holding me back from the life that I could live and want.
Right.
But I just could not bring myself to face doing that.
Right. It's hard.
And
It's very, very hard.
very hard. And it's you honestly don't, or I look at myself and I honestly didn't believe that forgiveness would be the cure. But it was.
Right. Yeah,
But
it is. It is.
it was.
Yeah.
And that baggage has got the moment that you truly embrace it, because maybe I teased it a little bit, forgiveness. Maybe I tested it out a little bit, but I never fully embraced it for 10 years.
Right.
But once I had, it's, yeah, that's the best way to describe it. That baggage has been put down and is behind me now and has gone.
Right. And you're free of it. And it no longer informs your decision making. It is no longer informing your other relationships. It's no longer informing your work. It's no longer informing. It's insidious how, because the thing is that what I always tell people think forgiveness, yes, is a gift. Say you're forgiving somebody else. That is a gift that you are giving somebody else. But at the same time, forgiveness, I think, wholly is more about yourself, in the sense that, you know, this unforgiveness is sort of like poison running through your veins. I think I say this in the book, you know, at one point, it was like a poison running through the character's vein until he chose forgiveness. He was really destroying himself. And it was really just informing everything that he was doing. And like I said, I mean, once you allow yourself, you know, the burden of that trauma is lifted from you and you literally feel free. And you wonder why you didn't choose to do it earlier. But, you know, it's a process. It really is a process. You know, and I think for some people, forgiving others is easier than forgiving themselves. I know that's always been the problem with me. I'm very good in terms of forgiving other people. I've always been really, really great about being able to let something go. Forgiving myself, I mean, for me, that's complicated. That's hard. And so in terms of the question, I mean, that's what I would say to my younger self. Become friends with that. Realize that, you know, you're just harming yourself, because that's what you're putting out. And, you know, and like I say, forgiveness doesn't mean that you condone something. Forgiveness doesn't mean that, you know, you're saying to the other person that what you did was okay. I don't want people to get, you know, misinterpret what I'm saying. It doesn't condone what happened. It doesn't condone what I'm saying to you is that it lifts you out of that burden, and it keeps you from letting it inform everything that you do. And, you know, finally one day I said, you know, I'm tired of carrying this around. Wouldn't it be easier just to let it go? And that doesn't change what
I guess what we're exploring here and we're discovering is that the things that help us inform our creative endeavors also inform and help us with our life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, you know, I cover a lot of the things that we've been talking about in the book. I really, really do. I mean, I think thematically the book really is about forgiveness and reclaiming one's life. I mean, it certainly is a book of transformation and redemption. You know, and I just chose to put it in this arena of a rock and roll group. Also because, you know, in that particular industry, a lot of extreme things happen. And I thought that was the best way to tell the story that I wanted to tell, in terms of, you know, sort of, I sort of equated to sort of beginning the story in a place of innocence. And then through a series of happenings, we find that innocence of the characters destroyed, which then leaves them no other choice but them to journey through the arc of the story to reclaim the most sacred parts of themselves. That's really what the book is about. it was very therapeutic for me in writing it. I sort of come to it with a lot of these themes and these ideas because they were certainly things that I had been exploring, you know, over the past 30 some odd years. But at the same time, writing the book, writing Bungalow Terrace, pushed me even further in terms of making some of these discoveries and in terms of a sense of self-healing. It really was very, very therapeutic. It really, really was. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was inspired to write the book. Because in my photography, I was exploring that shadow side. You know, a lot of my photography I took at night. I took a very grainy film. They were very sort of dark, moody, atmospheric images. I'm very proud of them. I think they resonated with a lot of with a large audience. But at the same time, what I realized now in my photography is I wasn't telling the second part of the story. I was taking the story into the woods. And now we're in the darkest part of it. It's like sort of the Wizard of Oz. If it ended when Dorothy and the Scarecrow and you know, the whole cast of characters were in the witch's woods, and we ended the story there. That's what I was doing with my photography. And I realized, oh, there's a second part of the story I'm not getting. There's a second part of the story I'm not telling. You know, so I said, okay, with the book, you know, so I get them into the darkest part of the woods, but then the second part is getting them out of the woods and getting them into light. You know, and sort of, and that's what I mean. You know, you can shift your light by having a shifted perception, because that shifted perception is, you know, sort of the rainbow, you know, at the end of the story. So writing the book helped me get to that place, you know, and I realized it was part of the story I was not telling in my photographs. I was just telling the story about getting into the darkest part of the wood and then leaving us all there.
And at what point
so yeah, so
when did you realize this? When did you realize that this was a massive turning point in your personal journey, becoming an author?
Well, I realized first that I wanted to be an author after I wrote that first chapter, and I finished it, and it was like time had stood still. I didn't realize how long I had been writing. I didn't realize what time it was. I didn't realize, I was just immersed in writing this chapter. And I just said to myself, that was the most satisfying, most creative thing I've ever done. So that's when I decided I wanted to be an author, because I said, I think I would like to experience this again. I think I had tapped into something bigger than myself. I think I had tapped into that creative process that we're all looking for, that inspiration, you know, that sort of expansive place in ourselves that we're all looking for creatively. And I was able to tap into that. And I think I was able to tap into it at that point because I had I hadn't committed to it yet. I mean, I had nothing to lose. I can sit here and write this chapter, and if it's no good, I can throw it away and move on with my life. I mean, so there was nothing riding on it. So I was just free to do whatever I wanted in that moment. You know, I didn't have, as you said, deadlines, or I didn't have somebody, you know, giving me an advance to write something. I was just writing something. And so I wanted to have that experience again. And then I said, well, okay, if this is what I'm going to do, what is this book about? And as I said, as I had glimpses of it, you know, as I was sort of mulling over the idea about writing it. But then when I realized what it was really about, the easy part was getting them into the woods. I knew how I was going to do that. I was like, okay, but how are we going to finish the book? How are we going to move into what the book really is about, which is about reclaiming one's life, which is about forgiveness, redemption, transfer, all of that. How are we going to do that? And that's when I had to start thinking in terms of, okay, well, write what you're writing in the moment. Don't focus on the next chapter, the next character, the next, you know, the book ending. You know, a lot of people say like, oh, I knew the ending before the beginning. It's like, I had no idea how the book was going to end necessarily when I started writing it. I said, focus on what you're writing right now and just focus in on making it as authentic and truthful as possible. And as I said, the way that I did that was to get in touch emotionally with what the characters were doing and experiencing in that moment. And then just focus, just be in the moment with that right now. Write this scene as it is right now. Don't worry about, you know, and then I would move on to the next thing. And then I just started just opening up to it. And then things would just inspirationally come to me. Oh, you know, and it was really, really important that certain characters have a happy ending. And I don't want to give anything away, but there's this one character where she does something that results in a sort of unspeakable tragedy that affects her entire family. But it was really important to me that she have a happy ending. I'm sorry, but that's what I'm saying emotionally, because in our human experience, so many of us, particularly in the creative arts, are judged on our worst day. And so I decided, I said, you know something, I don't want this character being judged on her worst day. And I had certainly given a foundation as to how this happened, why this happened. I mean, it was clear to the reader why this choice was made. There was no sort of ambiguity about it. But at the same time, I knew that, you know, the reader may have trouble with the action or the choice that she makes. But at the same time, I committed myself to giving her a happy ending, because I was like, I don't want to judge. I don't want this character judged based on her worst day. So it was things like that sort of inspiration. Because when I first initially started writing the book and I had the initial outline, the character disappeared with no resolution at all. Because I thought, oh, that would be dramatic. But then I sort of realized, well, is there anything truthful in that? Or is that going to satisfy an audience to have? Because I remember I would read books and I'd invest into a character and they would disappear. It was like when I heard that originally in the workshop of Dreamgirls, the character of Effie disappeared after the first act. I was like, oh my God, you know, and I thought to myself, well, is that what you want to do? I mean, they sort of realized, no, we have to sort of bring her back and, you know, redeem her in the second act. So a lot of these things started happening for me. And I apologize. I didn't mean to get emotional at that moment.
No, I think it's don't apologize. I think it's really important, and I think it's really telling that you care about these characters. You've created a fictional world, yet you still have emotions and feelings attached to them. Have you got any idea as to?
And as I said,
I was going to say, have you got any ideas as to why we develop such a strong emotional connection to a fictional character?
Well, I think it's because we live with them day in and day out, you know, and we know them better than anybody else. You know, we sometimes know them better than, like, you know, an extended family member. You know, I lived with these people, you know, I mean, it took me 5 years to write the book, to finish the book, where I got to a point where I was like, okay, I think it's ready to be published. So it took me 5 years to do that. And so I was living with these people and their experience for 5 years, not to mention the times that I would, you know, go back and write and rewrite. I mean, you know, as a playwright, I mean, dialogue is so incredibly difficult to get right, because it's not just about what you are trying to say, but it's about finding the character's voice and how the character is going to express what you're trying to say. And that's a tricky thing, because, you know, I'd be like, oh, this is a great word, but I'm like, well, but this character wouldn't even know what that word meant, you know? So is it about your ego and like your dexterity technically as a writer, you know, how smart you are, or is it about finding what it is you're trying to say through somebody else's voice? You know, and there are 4 main characters in Bungalow Terrace, so I had to find 4 distinct different voices so that when they're all talking at the same time, you know exactly who's talking. You know, oh, this is Vince talking, this is Kevin talking, this is Steve talking. Not like, wait a minute, who's saying what here when? Because unlike, you know, something on stage where you have different actors playing a part, you know, it's just something that's written on a page. So in order to do that, you really had to get into the psyche of these characters. You really had to sort of, excuse the phrase, get in bed with them. And, you know, you had to really know them inside and out. You know, what made them tick, you know, what their fears are, what their, you know, you just had to know everything about them. And so when you become that intimate with something, you become very protective of it. And it can become a very emotional experience. It really can. You know, but then at some point you then have to just like let it go. You know.
So now that you've let it go, now that it's come to a place of completion, it's out there in the world, how have you found it's been received?
Luckily, very positively. I mean, it got some wonderful reviews. All of the reader reviews, like on Amazon, that sort of thing, have been very, very positive. The thing that's been most rewarding is in terms of the demographic, because I really didn't have a demographic for the book. And I've had very young women come up to me and tell me how they were moved by the book and it really spoke to them, particularly in this particular generation. And not too long ago, I had a gentleman, he was in his 60s, and this was a real tough guy, you know, very blue collar, very working class. And I mean that in a extremely complimentary way, but, you know, just real from the surface. I mean, if you met him, like a real tough guy. And he whispered in my ear, he goes, I really loved your book. He goes, I won't tell this to anybody else, but there were a couple of times when I actually teared up. And to have that kind of, I mean, that's the kind of feedback that really means something to me, because in writing the book, it's all about the reader taking something away from it. You know, my desire is that it get into as many hands as possible, as many people read the book as possible, because I think that they will get something out of it. It's really not about, it's certainly not about royalties for me. It really isn't. It's about wanting to give it and have it enjoyed by other people. So the response has been so far very positive, and I'm very, very grateful about that. And then, I mean, you know, I've had a couple people, you know, I mean, there was one person who didn't necessarily love it, and that's okay. I just said, that's fine, you know, that's what makes horse races. I mean, that's a really old expression. You know, not everybody, you know, when it comes to the arts, not everybody is going to like your work. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be objective about it. It's okay, you know. That doesn't mean that it's not valid, and that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't resonate with other people. It's just not their particular cup of tea, and that's perfectly okay.
And I guess that's very difficult in the current world in which we're living at the moment, where you've got things like social media that gives you quick and precise analytics on validation. A lot of young creatives and artists put their work out there into the world. They see on social media that it only gets a small number of likes, and they feel that that has some truth in its value, in its place in the world, which it doesn't at all, does it?
No, I mean, it really doesn't. I mean, it really, really doesn't. I mean, and I'm not saying that, you know, it's not a hard thing not to get caught up in. I mean, I'll be completely honest, I've at times been caught up in it. Like, why didn't this post get more of a reaction than you know, more of a reaction as opposed to the reaction that it did? But you just have to sort of, you know, get back to a place of realizing that, you know, ultimately it's really not that important. What's important is the work, and to focus on the work. And as long as you're putting out in a really good way, then it will find itself to whoever is supposed to see it. Whoever the audience is for this book will be the audience for this book. And whoever is supposed to read it will read it. As long as I'm putting it out in a really positive, good way, then it will make itself known to the people who are supposed to read it. And I really firmly believe that, you know, and I just have to let go of the rest of it, because the rest of it is just based on my own insecurity about, like, oh, you know, I only got this many likes instead of that many likes. And the interesting thing about it is that until I got the book published and I was sort of, you know, negotiated into all of this social media, because that's kind of what you have to do to publicize a book and market a book. I had never been on social media. I didn't have a cell phone until like a year ago. A year ago was the first time I ever had a cell phone in my entire life. It was not a way of life that I really engaged in. I'd never been on Facebook. I didn't know what Instagram was. I just was not something I engaged in. I mean, it wasn't important in my life. And so when I find myself getting attached to that sort of thing, I just say to myself, you know, a year ago, you didn't even know what this was. Why is this so important to you now? You know for a fact that your book will make it to an audience. You know, let it go.
I think we all understand that social media, the internet, is all, it's part of life now. It's part of society, and it does have some value. It does have you do have the potential there to reach people you'd have never reached previously. I would have never have met you this opportunity to talk to you. Had it not been for social media, had it not been for these things that we have in the world now. So it does have its place. It's whether we use that and as a thing for validation is where it can become a problem. I know, for example, someone that she is a wonderful poet, and she was doing a fantastic thing on social media of sharing her poetry, and I could see that, you know, the posts of her sharing her poetry would only get 1 or 2 likes and very little engagement. Recently, I've seen her social media change into more of a modeling page, and she's sharing lots of swimwear, posing. And I'm not saying there isn't value in being a model, but now she's getting the validation from modeling rather than the poetry. And I see this more and more, and I do hope this person realizes how beautiful her poetry was, even though the attention that she was getting wasn't perhaps what it was deserving to get.
Right. Well, it can be very seductive. I mean, and like I say, I have no judgment about it. I mean, it certainly has been a wonderful tool in terms of marketing the book. And it certainly has made me certainly better equipped in terms of, you know, this world of technology that we live in. So I'm grateful for that. But I was talking about what you were talking about, finding your personal validation in it. And I have to catch myself sometimes when I'm looking at something and I'm allowing it to define my worth based on whether or not it got likes or whether or not people responded to it. And I have to be careful about that. Just for me, that's just me.
Well,
because I don't want to put.
I think you need to also be careful, because the system is set up to engage you and to draw you in for more attention, for being on the platforms in the first place. And the more time you spend on the platform, the more value and monetary gain that platform has. So it wants to keep you in a place of wanting more likes and more validation. So we have to do that work to realize ourselves what is the true validation, what is the true value in what we're doing.
Right, exactly. So now I'm much better about just putting something out there, and then, you know, turning off the computer and letting it go, and saying, you know, I tried to put this out with as much positive energy as I possibly could. It will reach who it's supposed to reach. If it's supposed to reach 300 people, it will reach 300 people. If it's supposed to reach 3 people, it'll reach the right 3 people, and just let it go. Instead of becoming sort of obsessed with how many likes I gather, you know, how many responses I gather, however you define all of that. I mean, I'm certainly not a expert in any of that. As I said, it was something I started doing basically a year ago. So, but I mean, you know, like I said, I have absolutely no judgment about it, you know, and there are some people who excel at it, and I applaud them because they excel at it. I just can't get too caught up in it in terms of it defining whether or not I have a certain amount of self-worth. That's a dangerous slope for me to get into.
Exactly. Well, Robert, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I've truly enjoyed this journey of discovery which we've had today, and hearing about your book and your personal journey. But I do have one final question for you, and I think we've kind of already covered it. But moving forward, what dream do you have for the future?
Oh, what dream do I have of the future? Well, I think both personally and collectively, I guess my dream for the future is for us all not to be so focused in on what the outside world is dictating in terms of how to get someplace. And we become more of a society that's more introspective, and a society that is more interested in what's going on in here as opposed to what's going on out there. In the sense that something I did write in the book is I said, you know, be still and listen, and your answers will come to you. And I want personally to be somebody who follows that philosophy. where whenever I'm in a place of conflict, or I'm in a place of upset, or there's some sort of fork in the road, something is going on in my life, instead of looking for the answers out there, you know, and calling friends and calling family members and what should I do, just literally getting to a place of just going inward and getting still and being silent and listening and understanding and knowing that the answer is within me. It's not out there. And I think as a society that would all serve us well as well. So I mean, I guess that would be my dream. I think that would be kind of an idyllic kind of world, because we'd all be taking responsibility for our own lives, and you know, we all wouldn't be so focused on and worried about what our neighbors were doing. You know, we'd be more focused in on making sure that everybody else is doing okay. You know, so when I say going inward, I don't mean being selfish. I'm just saying that, like, by going inward, then it makes you come out of yourself, and you know, you're more open to creating more of a community, more collaborative community. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I wish we'd become more of a collaborative community, but that starts in here, not necessarily out there.
Well, this has been wonderful, Robert. I do truly appreciate it. I'm truly grateful for you sharing today. And if there has been anyone that's joining us for this conversation, anyone watching or listening, I appreciate you as well. Thank you very much for joining us on this journey.
Thanks again. I've learned tremendously. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.